Oh, hello. Hello.
Aloha.
Hey, good to see you. Hmm. 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 Hello. You might take the time to go to the other pages if you want to see everyone here. This is seen and unseen with their photos. They're alive. Yeah. Good to see you. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what, Michelle? You are talking. I can see that, but we can't hear you. And I can see your.
Huh.
Oh, now I can hear
My mic.
you. You were unmuted. Yeah, I don't know what was happening.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
yeah. Try that again. Take two.
hmm. Well, we were, I was uh, asking us all to connect with our physical body right now in the present moment. So, of course, there will be memories of our visual image from the past of our body, and that will come up when we bring our attention to, say, our hands or our face or our whole body. But just see if you can notice the memory of the visual image, and then just let the attention receive whatever physical sensations are coming into your field of attention. The space around our body, the sensations where our sit bones connect with our bench, our cushion, or our back on the mat. Receiving, receiving, receiving. And we're going to take a little time to connect with our chitta, heart center. Might want to put your hand, palm, fingertips there. Receiving the connection of our attention there, or our hands. Receiving the touch of our attention, our hand. And this is at first just allowing whatever you notice in the heart, in the mind, chitta. There seems to be a kind of wild range of experience going on there these days. So if there's numbness or indifference, just seeing if you can care about that just as it is, not without judgment, just letting the not caring or the numbness be just as it is. A feeling of wanting it to just turn off for a while. Just touching that with kindness and care, gratitude for the defense, and acceptance that this is how it is right now. And there might be, again, a range of despair or grief, sadness, anger, fear, well-being, joy, kindness, care, acceptance, caring about this flexibility of heart, mind, caring about the joy and sorrow, including numbness or indifference. Sometimes the attention can just open up around our body and notice care or kindness from a great open field. Doesn't have to be inside the body at all. Other times it might feel like the kindness or care, appreciation, acceptance is infusing the heart, mind, or the cells of our bones, tissues, or more like a butterfly just landing there, like landing on a flower once in a while. And if you can, receiving care. Or the quiet well-being. reassurance, reassurance of connection itself. Noticing your body, it's the whole body, and notice if there's any softening. Softening of the heart, mind to be with things just as they are or not. You notice hearing, noticing again if there's a memory of what might be appearing, that a thought about it is a memory, which is okay. That's just a thought or image appearing in the present thinking. And then seeing if you can receive the vibration and texture. If you can, just as it's happening, the silence. That range of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral within sound, the Vedana, the mental feeling. Just letting it come and go, just as it is. It's that softening, allowing to be with things just as they are. And the physical sensations within our hands. See the mental image and then drop into the physical sensations, textures and vibrations, just as they are, like with the sound. And then in the abdomen, the movement of the breath. Receiving that rising movement like a swell in the ocean. That affects our moon. Swell, the falling movement. like the wave crashing on the shore. Just be careful of believing any thoughts. Letting them come and go like the sounds, physical sensation, emotion, thoughts. They're not mine. Mine, me, I, yours, ours. With great care and kindness.
you, Michelle. Well, last week I had the opportunity to go back to the island of Lanai to support the Sangha over there. It's a very little island for folks who don't know. Just about 2,000 people live there full time. And I hadn't been there, it turns out, since before the pandemic. Kind of amazing to see how time has passed. We were going to do a program there, but we ended up canceling it when there was another peak. So it was just a nice opportunity for me to go back and just reconnect a little bit with the Sangha there and the place, the land, and in particularly the Hongwanji temple that we are able to use for the sittings and programs. It's for folks who don't know, uh, a different Buddhist lineage out of Japan, a Pure Land lineage, and was these kind of Jodo Shinshu lineages were some of the main um, Buddhist temples, traditions that came to Hawaii back in the plantation era when there were so many Japanese workers working in the cane fields, sugar cane fields, and there it was in Lanai, the pineapple plantations. So much amazing history and stories of that process and those times here in the islands. And so, people wanted their religion. They also wanted their communities to have that place of coherence. It was more than just a temple, more than just for worship. It was, in all of the islands, incredible cultural and just community resources, organizing principle, so much in terms of food, in terms of social welfare, in terms of, like you see many churches, providing those kinds of services to their communities in so many ways. And on Lanai, it's still, they have what is the oldest Hongwanji altar in Hawaii, um, about 100 years old, and made in Japan and brought over. And so beautiful, so ornate and delicate and strong. And, mm, it's something that in many temples they will try to, kind of keep putting on gold leaf and keep it up. This one has more of the patina of time having passed. Right now the congregation barely exists, like it does in a lot of places in Hawaii. That those temples, or really they called them churches, and were so part and kind of entwined with the plantation economy that as that changed, um, it changed a lot about the community's relationship to those temples. And so there's still a big hump on Wenji and on Oahu. and other more thriving ones, but many of the smaller temples are really struggling, to stay viable financially in terms of these buildings, in terms of their congregation. So it feels good to kind of recognize that sense of Buddhist lineage in Hawaii that may not be our own tradition, but that is still like our foreparents and our ancestors that we have a responsibility to and um, relationship with that feels really important. And this altar in particular has always meant a lot to me ever since I first visited, which I think was maybe in 2017. It's a very powerful story about the after Pearl Harbor, the beginning of World War II. As many folks know, the United States implemented a program of relocation of Japanese Americans into these internment camps in different parts of the country. So Japanese citizens, American citizens who were living along the coastline weren't trusted by the government and many people. Um, and so land was taken from them, their jobs, their property, and they were sent to these camps for several years, in many instances. And when returned, didn't have weren't given a lot of people were not given those back. So there's a horrible trauma that was invoked in that process and those processes. But in Hawaii, there were so many Japanese people of Japanese ancestry that it wasn't viable to send a quarter of the population to the mainland. So the tact was different, which was that the ministers and priests, bishops, and stuff like that were sent to internment, and the Japanese Americans, or at that point, you know, complicated around statehood and everything like that, but the people of Japanese descent weren't allowed to congregate in their churches or temples. And so they had the temple taken away from them in all of these places, and including on Lanai. And so in the middle of this process, or before it sort of finally unfolded, the community on Lanai of that Hongwanji snuck into their own church at night and dismantled their whole altar and carefully wrapped it and took it away and hid it. Different stories about where it was hidden in the cemetery and in different places. And then it wasn't until about 5 years later that the war had come to a close and the policies changed and the community was allowed to congregate again. In the meantime, their temple had been given to a Christian church, so they didn't have that building anymore. And they were given another building, not as nice. But were immediately inspired to bring their altar back out and put it back together and rebuild it as that sort of sacred center of their community and their worship. And so it's still there, this incredible altar, incredible story, and such a powerful example and tribute to the resilience, that community in the face of kind of overwhelming pressure, violence, mm, you know, oppressiveness. And there's something that I've always felt is so important about that kind of method, that tactic, that strategy for making it through difficult times, times where we may find ourselves overwhelmed, outgunned, outmaneuvered, um, where we're up against something that feels more powerful than we can confront directly. That this sense of the wisdom, the skillfulness, the subtlety, mm, the carefulness of knowing kind of when to fight and when to protect our most sacred things, the most important things to us, to our communities. And that it has a lot to do with how we often teach the Dhamma and the practice, right? That we have this valiant desire and longing to be free and to confront these very powerful forces in our hearts, greed, hatred, and delusion. But that there are times when we have to recognize that we aren't up for it, that what we're encountering in the moment is overwhelming, and that there are still skillful ways to protect ourselves and protect our hearts and um, reemerge and engage when the conditions are more favorable for our success. And that's actually like an honoring, and it's that desire to not be reckless in our um, path towards freedom, awakening, liberation. And this it's like, do we value that? It doesn't always look externally as sort of heroic as we might imagine and fantasize about ourselves, or how you're supposed to respond to kind of overwhelming force and that's attacking you. But how, if we can recognize how beautiful an action that is, how careful, how thoughtful, how patient, you know, and how fortunate, it's like 5 years, they could still do it, you could still pull it back together. And what would happen after 10 years or 20 years? How long time goes by before no one remembers where the temple was buried, where it was protected. And so it's like, yeah, maybe, it's clearly there's still worship happening in those 5 years. There's still this cultivation, but it's internal, it's quiet, it's underground, right? And that's an important lesson for all of us at all times. And certainly now, whether in terms of like the forces we may be encountering in the world or in our own hearts, minds of, Michele and of course many, right? The grief, the anxiety, the worry, the frustration, anger, sadness, and these overwhelming things. There's like, you'll see, of course, there's these calls, okay, now is the time to fight, or now is the time to shine. And nothing wrong with that. But it's worth also considering. It's like, maybe now is also the time to be careful. You know, don't don't think that our light can't be extinguished, right? To not be that reckless. Careful with the most sacred thing to us. And where are we meeting ourselves? Where are we meeting people? Nobody likes the people who drive around with their high beams on all night, you know. But are we thoughtful about our light? Mm. Careful with ourselves, careful with our communities, careful with each other. How do we, protect our hearts, right? And protect ourselves and protect others in the face of overwhelming odds. What is heroic in that moment? What is skillful? Do we, what do we do as Buddhists, as practitioners, as yogis, however, wherever you may sort of identify and find yourself along this spectrum of people who sit quietly, try to understand and try to develop these beautiful qualities. When we encounter adversity, it's like this is it. Do we keep fueling the fire of perpetuating more flames of um of overwhelm? Do we use it to dig deeper? So I want to offer sort of like four little frames of just given where we know so many folks are and kind of what so many are going through and where we are in our world. Four paths that are not exclusive of each other, but given the reality that we have um, limited energy and limited time, these questions to take seriously about where are we using our energy, where are we using our time right now, and what are our priorities, and to take responsibility for as much of that as we can. This classic example of in the Atadanda Sutta, the Buddha saying, look at people in strife. I will tell how I experience terror. Seeing people floundering like fish in small puddles, competing with one another. As I saw this, fear came into me. The world was entirely insecure. All directions were knocked out of line. Wanting a haven for myself, I saw nothing that wasn't laid claim to. The implication is by greed, hatred, and delusion. I saw nothing that wasn't laid claim to by greed, hatred, and delusion. Seeing nothing in the end but competition, I felt discontent. And then I saw an arrow here, so very hard to see, embedded in the heart. Overcome by this arrow, you run in all directions. But simply on pulling it out, you don't run, you don't sink. And so that sense of like, what are we doing? Are we overcome by this arrow and running in all directions? Are we the fish floundering in small puddles? You know, and recognizing like where, how are we taking this? And where is our sense of responsibility around finding that arrow? So hard to see here in the heart, not out there, not all the other stuff that's going on, not in the news, right? Where do we keep agitating ourselves? All agitating, the floundering, running in all directions. And where do we pull out the arrow? When do we look for that security in the place that the Buddha has been telling us to look for all these times, versus where we have always been told to not seek it, right? That we know we'll never find it, right? In the world, in that which is based on condition. Can we use this to go deeper? This amazing poet, mystic, Sufi Attar was predated Rumi by some time. He said, an honored man once asked a Sufi, brother, how do you fare? And the Sufi replied, I'm trapped in this tight oven we call the world. I'm parched lipped and burdened with transgressions. and I must break my back for every loaf of bread I score. If you're looking for a moment of merriment, you're either dreaming or distracted. If you're seeking good times, take care to arrive on the other side of life intact. This thing you call happiness in this world is nothing like true joy. Here, where the ego blazes like fire, show me a heart that is truly content. If you survive, if you swivel like a compass around the world, you'll not find a single satisfied heart. So these four things that I'll just say briefly and then kind of go into them. The first is like digging in deeper to our practice, trying to get free, right? Where do we use our disappointment with the world, with the reality of suffering in the world in our lives as a motivator to go deeper into our practice, to get free rather than squirm? Where do we take the energy? So that's like one way. Where do we take the energy to do good, right? To bring goodness into the world? Uh, all of the beauty and all of the generosity and all of the good qualities that we have cultivated and that we know we're capable of, where do we use that as an expression, right? Of being part of the goodness. Third has to do with if we are concerned about the world, are we are we involved in actually building power, worldly power, to make things the way we want them to be? And then fourthly, the reality that wherever we want to put our energy and time, we also have obligations, familial, physical, the reality of the obligations in our life. And so these four, and it's not saying that this is all that exists, but to consider these four opportunities and how they may relate to each other, where they don't relate to each other, and what it means to prioritize and what it means if we don't. But this primary question, right, that is the thrust of our offerings and our teachings and the lineage and what you read and what you practice is like getting free, right? Unbinding the heart from greed, hatred, and delusion, and understanding what are the conditions that support that practice and that process, and what are the conditions that undermine it. How much of everything else can you be doing and still be considering that to be our priority, right? Can we still pursue as our priority the unbinding of the heart from suffering? And now I don't mean to assume, because I don't, that that is the priority for everyone here or anyone who may listen to this. Certainly not, but it certainly is the priority for some. And it is the main thrust of this whole lineage. And so it's like to start there feels important, right? Which is like unbinding the heart, finding peace in the midst of everything. And this question of like, how can I be at peace if the world is going to hell? And it's a very good question. And it's also literally the whole point of the Dhamma. Like that is literally what this is about, is like knowing that the world is on fire, that the world is going to follow its conditions and all its all its conditioning and all its beauty and all its mayhem, and that the heart can find freedom within that truth, not outside of it, not in denial of the world, but in recognition of it, in relationship with it. But yes, with appropriate protective conditions and the decision about where we're putting our energy. But it's like, yes, if it's raining outside, does your mind get wet? If we are paralyzed in our bodies, can we still be happy? Yes, right? If we if we are in a war, can our hearts be at peace? Yes, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. And it is meant to purify the questions of how can I justify that? How can I, you know, you know, not do everything I can to help the world? And those are important questions. And of course, we get involved in those. And to reiterate, I'm not saying these paths are exclusive of one another, or that they aren't informing one another, or they can't support one another. But to remember that there is always going to be some part of the Dhamma that can't be defended in worldly terms. There is something about Nibbana that is not and doesn't need to be justified in terms of the world. The unbinding of itself, the truth of that is just like the world and the liberation of the world and finding peace in the world and changing the world in the ways that we may want or be engaged in don't need to be justified by the Dhamma or by Christianity or by any religion, which doesn't mean that there aren't beautiful socially valuable qualities that are developed through the practice, right? Worldly, beautiful, helpful qualities that are developed of generosity and patience and kindness and um, all of the good things, that they are not only of benefit to us, right? Of course they're not. And I will say more about just like, okay, and what does it mean to engage the world in trying to cultivate those things and bring them to bear? And what doesn't it mean in terms of control, in terms of power? But the world is on fire. The world has always been on fire. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha said that the all is on fire. Seeing is on fire. Hearing is on fire. The body is on fire. The mind is on fire. And the extinguishment of our involvement in that process comes through the release, which comes through the disenchantment, and the disenchantment that comes through understanding, and the understanding that comes through relationship, mindfulness, right? Care, love, of recognizing equanimity, right? This beautiful quality of equipoise, of stability, right? Of total acceptance. It is not nihilism. It is not saying that nothing matters. The Buddha was so explicit about that. Equanimity is rooted in the understanding that all actions have consequences, and that it's the moral quality of those actions that determines the consequences of those actions. Right? The peace of mind, right? The liberation of mind only comes through the deep reckoning of the suffering caused by greed, the suffering caused by hatred and ignorance, the deep compassion we have for all beings. including ourselves, right, to unbind, and what it actually takes to unbind in this way. And the more we practice, the more we see how much it takes, right? The humbler we are, hopefully. Mhm. Even the the social benefits of enlightenment are something like we barely talk about, but it's always something in the kind of Burmese context and the monastic context that we trained in and are coming out of, it's like I remember seeing the Myatang Sayadaw once, and we would go visit while teaching and managing the retreat at Chazwa. And, uh, we'd ask questions about practice and how to get, how to move forward. And at some point, he just said, you should move here. You should come stay in Burma. Get enlightened. This is the best place to do it. Better than wherever you're going back to. Not that he knew anything about where I was going back to, but he was right, of course. Uh, and I said, well, it's like I'm trying to I have, I have some obligations, to family and friends, and I'm trying to also help people. And he says, if you want to help people, get enlightened. It's like that's how you can really help people is becoming an arahant. So that should be your priority. I was like, huh. And I didn't listen to him. I mean, of course, it's like we make these decisions, right? About like, okay, our obligations or the things we want to do. And that yet it still was important to be confronted with that. It's like, okay, that's fine. Don't stay here and practice, but you know that like you should have certain expectations then of the development of your path in that way. And certainly consider the possibility that actually by doing this, that is the best thing for everyone else. That is truly how you'll be able to help the world. I certainly didn't argue with him. I was reminded recently, well, we're talking to Michelle about when uh, she and Steve and others had bought the land out here on the Big Island to build a meditation center, and just this overwhelming amount of like effort and work and complexity to trying to do something like that. Uh, and they had Sayadaw U Pandita come out and visit, and Sayadaw Lakana, I don't know if it was the same visit or not, but Sayadaw U Pandita, they showed him around and they were talking about where to build a pagoda and what was the best spot, and they asked, they just said, yeah, it's hard. We don't, it's like this is gonna, we don't know how, how did you have any guidance about how to make something like this happen? And he said, oh, well, you need an arahant. If you get an arahant, there'll be a temple. Like, no problem. It's like, right, you can imagine how inspiring that would be and how motivating. And there we are. No temple, no arhats. Ah, so where we ended up for the time being. Mm. So just that sense of like, are we taking that seriously? Are we using this to dig in? Okay. Then there is the doing of the good. Yay. We love the doing of the good, right? It's like you think about this whole path, how it's framed, dana, sila, bhavana. That bhavana, that mind cultivation and purification and discernment of all of these things is predicated upon the offering of our goodness and the generosity and the cultivation of beautiful qualities and the restraint of the unwholesome, and how beautiful that is, how important it is for us to be able to be in touch with our own goodness by creating art, by creating music, by helping people, by being involved in the world in a way that is helpful, right? And to be careful about being, I don't, the scale of that is not, uh, you have no idea the impact of one kind gesture, right? Versus being involved in a huge program of goodness, It's not to say there's anything wrong with trying to work at scale, but that sense of not being so preoccupied with that we don't value the cultivation of good in simple, quiet, beautiful terms, you know, how important that is. And of course that the sila, the refraining from the harmful is part of that. You know, these days you just think about what are these tendencies? It's like, is right blame on the Eightfold Path somewhere? It's like, I don't see right blame anywhere. But I don't see right caffeination either, and that's a good one, especially as winter approaches. But I was thinking even in terms of like intoxicants, it's like, of course, we usually refer to that in terms of alcohol and, drugs, recreational drugs. But just right now, it's like, how about the news? Like, do you ever consider the news as an intoxicant? Do you think it's like the refrain from intoxicants, which lead to, uh, well, we're forgetting the translation, right? The obscuring the mind, right? Um, it's like, are these things that are helping us be less reckless, helping us be more careful? The more there's wanting to be informed, and then there's like something else, right? There's this other thing of like, why do we find the mayhem and the franticness and the judgment and the opinions and the views and all of that? Like, what is so intoxicating about that? What are we doing to protect this like little fire, this little light? Are we taking that seriously in terms of our ethical conduct in ourselves? Never mind what we might be generating in the world. I won't do the whole, we don't have to read the whole chant, but just that reminder of like, there's so much instruction in our tradition about goodness and the doing of that which is good, the Mangala Sutta, and for lay people too, right? It's not just for monks and nuns. Patirupa desawasocha, ubecha katapunyata, atasama pandindacha, etam mangala mutamam. To live in a suitable place, to have performed meritorious actions in the past, and to set oneself in the right direction. This is the highest blessing. Mata pitu upatanam, Darasa sangaho, anakula cha kamanta, etam mangala mutamam. To look after one's mother and father, to support one's partner and children, and have a peaceful occupation. This is the highest blessing. Danancha dhammacharyacha, nyataka nyancha sangaho, anawajani kamani, etam mangala mutamam. To be generous, righteous in conduct, to assist one's relatives, and engage in blameless actions. This is the highest blessing. And fortunately for us, it goes on and on and on, right? All of the goodness, right, that we can be offering. And that sense of like reminding ourselves and remembering that no matter what is happening in the world, no matter what is happening in our lives and in our bodies, that we have access to these beautiful qualities and that there is a value to them. And the power, the impact is not knowable, ultimately, though some things can be discerned right away, right? The goodness, the appreciation, that sense of connection, of caring, it's so beautiful, so important. I remember asking my mom once, I must have been in college, and, just upset about the world and the way things were going. Oh, no, it wasn't in college. It was after, you know, we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. And I just remember, and, gone to these big marches and felt like they didn't have much impact. And I remember asking my mom, did she ever think we would win? Would the side of goodness and justice and care and, you know, all of the good things, did she feel like we could ever win, really? And she paused and she said, I don't know. And I don't know if it matters. And she said, because just think about if all of the people who are trying to protect one another, to create a more just world, to create more goodness in the world through all of the different material and spiritual and artistic and all of the ways, just imagine if they weren't doing it, if everyone just stopped. Imagine how bad things would be. And so you don't need to believe in the ultimate winning in order to know the goodness and essential value of what it is to do good and to try to be a part of the goodness. How important that is. And I think there is still that legitimate question of, is it enough? Right? I mean, I think so many of us will hear it's like it's true. Nibbana, enlightenment, doesn't need to be defended in social terms. And there is so much goodness that can come out of the cultivation of all of these beautiful qualities. And there is a social value to that. There is a value in the world. And then, is it enough? Is it enough for how we want the world to be? Our our biggest ambitions, our biggest, desire to really change things. And there for many people, that is like a fundamentally important question. And it's not totally satisfied that it's like, it's good to grow a garden, right? Where it's like, yeah, it is good to grow a garden, definitely. And it's like, what about, the big thing? And then it's like there is this, you know, 20 years ago, maybe more, this question that I think I've said before, that I was at this gathering of all these spiritual activists from different traditions and doing all this amazing work, right? Such cool work and beautiful work in the world of integrating their spiritual traditions and practices into like good things for their communities. And then someone asks a question in the group, honoring all of that, and then this question of, do we want power enough to win? And it was like this like stunned silence in this group of people, because I think most of us hadn't been confronted directly with that question, particularly in those identities as like our spiritual traditions and our religious traditions, do we want power enough to win? Because that is also what we're talking about. There's like all the good we can do in helping people and helping and all of the things. Then there is like the question of like directly confronting the power of all the bad things, right? However you want to define those, all the isms, all the reality that those are very well structured and intentionally designed to maintain, establish power, and to confront those on the level that they would need to be confronted in order to really overthrow them, whatever, that is like a whole other realm of work and motivation um, and is that really what we'll just say that group of people, is that really what we want? Are we ready to do that? And it was very clear that in the end, no one, not in a direct way, but it wasn't, that it was too confusing, that there was too much of a uncertainty in I think ultimately a helpful way of people wondering what is their relationship to that social power, political power. And I would say that it is important to be careful about that question, and and good to be kind of ambivalent or uncertain, and to take time to really consider what that means and what that might mean. What I will just say in this context is that again, it's not that it's not influenced by the other things that I've mentioned, but to recognize it as a different path. It is its own work. It is not what the Buddha described. The Buddha has very little that is directly about, in our tradition, that is directly about social change on a massive scale. It's simply not the thrust of his teaching. And it's not probably helpful to hold that against the Dhamma, right? Again, it's like he was trying to help people get liberated in a very specific way. There are impacts of that, there are implications to that. But the process of trying to build enough political power to confront these forces in the world is, other people have developed more about how to do that. And it is its own way. It is another aspect of a path. And it's not to say that you can't do that path and be a Buddhist. Absolutely, right? But it's also to recognize, and certainly to say, that these all inform each other. The three I've mentioned, and one more I'll mention. But to also recognize, what does it mean? What are we willing to give up for one path or another, right? Our protection, our quietude, the ultimate purification of the mind, the ultimate liberation of a society. We may, the distinction between what we want to be true and what we know to be true is important these days more than ever, perhaps. We may want there to be a kind of unified sense of my liberation of the world. It's all the same. But it's helpful to sort of really feel, to get grounded in what our direct experience is and what do we actually know to be true. And where are the places where they may support each other, but also the places where they may really be at odds. And I would say one of the places is this question around power and around wanting power. And yes, I think sitting creates power. Our own spiritual cultivation has impact beyond our knowing. Um, but you can't count on it in like dependable ways. You know what I mean? It's not like, I don't have a lot of confidence that like just by enough people meditating, the world will like transform, as you sometimes hear in, certain other lineages or traditions. But that's okay. It's like that, it's like if you're building a house, it's okay that there are people doing different jobs, right? That like the carpenter and the electrician and the plumber, You don't want the plumber doing the electricity. And you don't expect the, electrician to know how to construct the house. It's good if they're in conversation with one another, you know, but you don't need these people to always to know everything, right? Or them to be responsible to these people. It's like they are influencing one another. The more they're able to kind of collaborate and build relationship and influence and inform one another, like the better, But it doesn't mean that each one has to be the same as the other or totally beholden to the other. That there's ways that that can happen and still understand that they might be different paths. Or the electrician one day decides they want to be a carpenter and like they can do that, or go back to being an electrician one day. Our there are so many ways that we're all exploring this. And I'm not, it's so it's like, it's not to say you have to pick one of these, because I'd say, and then the fourth one is just obligation, family, friends, our bodies. You have to go to the grocery store. You have to make dinner. We just have to do. There's a lot we just have to go to work, right? There are things that are taking our time and energy that are simply our obligations, things we have to do. And so there's this fourth thing of like, okay, where else are we putting our energy, our time, our attention? And again, some of these things are inevitable, unavoidable. And then this question of like, well, what are our priorities with that, with changing the world, with being good and doing all the good things? How much time are we still having to sit? And so that is going to still be my ultimate encouragement and question. And like, this is what this is about, right? It's like unbinding your heart from greed, hatred, and delusion. And yes, the way that happens involves, our relationship with these people and what I learned through this experience. And I tried to do this and, it was really hard, but boy, that was like really, that developed something really beautiful. And, or this incredible thing happened, so it's not to say that the only way to develop the heart is to let the other three go and you live in the, in the mountains. Um, but there is something about being careful to not be so deluded that we think you're not making choices, that like that the decisions that we're making about where we're putting our energy and time don't have an impact, and that we have some responsibility around what gets included or excluded in that. And so in these times, where is the priority for any of us? And for those of us who feel like the priority is this, it's like getting free. What are we doing in terms of the other decisions? What are we doing about the other things that are calling our attention? Where do we have choice? It's a beautiful poem. Two little things left. I had never read this from Stonehouse, but mm, he has all his own poems. This is a 13th, 14th century Chinese hermit poet. Probably still my favorite. Good translations by Red Pine. He has a bunch of his poems, and then he has a bunch of gathas and other things that are more like teachings later on. Some are specific kind of poems that he wrote to students, other monks. But he was a hermit in his deepest heart, but he also got called to go back to the monastery quite a bit in his life and had to be pulled down from his mountain home to like run things, which he did not enjoy, but he did it. And then this is a little poem he wrote to a younger monk who had been in the mountains nearby him, but was getting called home. For attendant Ching going home to see his teacher. Your teacher grows old at Chungshan Temple, with no one to lean on from dawn to dusk, unless you return to serve and attend him. How can he maintain a teacher's decorum? Your mother, too, is advanced in years, with nobody left but you. Her hopes of old age are fading without you. Her tears fall every day at her gate. Leaving your mother and teacher for the mountains, what did you hope to achieve? To rejoice in the way and poverty is hard. To live in a thatched hut isn't easy. To have to plant pines and bamboo, you have to hoe slopes and dig ditches. You have to haul water and wood. You have to tend taro and greens. You have to walk circles and chant. You have to sit still and not sleep. With pigweed soup and millet for your hunger, watered down rice gruel for your stomach. People all work for food and clothes. I'm trapped too by burdens of the body. Unless we fathom the ground of our minds, karmic awareness provides no support. The woods and streams are a temporary home. Neither of us could plan a long stay. Neither of us should plan a long stay. A letter arrived from Master Huang Qiang asking you back between the lines. You left before you finished, unable to bear a whole letter about duty. But filial duty comes first, they say. Among laymen, among monks, it's the same. Parents and teachers are fields of devotion. You don't need to be a monk and practice Zen. One day your thoughts will return from the noise. A riding crop won't slow occasional visits. It says the riding crop is a reference to like that he was probably from like a wealthy family, so he had a little one of those little whips that make a horse guide a horse. So in the sense of like even these people who dedicated and devoted so much of their lives, and it's not like they just go practice in the mountains. It's like our parents and teachers are fields of devotion. We all have our duties, our obligations. I was saying to these folks about like this one nun that we know eh, at in the neighboring nunnery next to Chazwa. It's like we're always looking for ways to support the nuns over there. They just don't get as much support or respect in a lot of ways as the monks do. And so sometimes like someone will come along that just is like right and just has so much potential and this sense of like wanting to be able to support them. And this young woman was just like that, so smart, so connected. It's a little bit out of her box. She had studied English. She's, spoke wonderfully. She had attained all of the levels of study and advanced degrees that you can get in terms of the Pali Canon, you know, and there was a notion of some of us to help her actually go practice, that she just has a lot of responsibilities as a nun. And, she expressed interest and, some enthusiasm for that. And we wanted to kind of help support that. But she also was like, the way that system works is if you're accomplished and you're bright and you're talented and you show potential, they end up giving you other little nuns to take care of and to cultivate and to teach, right? And so all of the donations that she ended up taking went to building a little home for her and the four little nunlets, that she was taking care of. And this is like, war people, there's a civil war. This was even before that, but there's just like war-torn conflict, poverty throughout the country. And so people are sending their kids from distant lands, right, to be nuns and monks because it's the only way to take care of them. And so these nunneries and the monasteries are, you know, filled with these children sometimes, right, who need to be raised and taken care of. And so this is what her life has become, and she doesn't express any resentment to that. She's like, this is her duty. This is her obligation to the sasana. This is her path, cultivating these young minds and, training them. And there's like an incredible goodness in that. And this sense of like, okay, where does one also lose, even with all of the commitment? And this is, it's like this woman, everyone here has sat more than this nun, has had more chance to sit meditation retreats than this nun whose whole life is devoted to the Dhamma. And it's like, are you making use of that? You know, it's like, are you getting how rare that is in this world? Do we really fathom like just how hard it is to find the time to practice? And if we have the time and the support and the conditions to do it, it's like, do we recognize like where we, the incredible gift and privilege and good karma, and are we digging in? Are we using it? You know, are we, are we honoring what we've received and the deepest longing of our heart, you know, beyond obligations to anyone else or to lineage? It's like, are we honoring the parts of ourselves that want to be free, no matter what's happening in the world? Mm. So to close, I thought I would offer a different kind of chant. I think I might have done this once before. The, one of the other ways that the Hongwanji tradition in Hawaii and probably on the mainland, I don't know, but I assume so, protected itself over the years was to uh, incorporate more Western and European forms and structures, right? So they call it church and they sit in pews. And you'll see this, I'm going to just offer a short metta hymn, right? It's not a chant, it's a hymn uh, that uses, you know, Western chord progressions and stuff like that. Um, been watching this great PBS documentary on gospel music, and um, makes me wonder what might be next for us.
Gospel music.
This is not gospel. Yeah, this is this is pre-gospel. May all the living beings that there are, those that are stationary and those that move. Hold on, I gotta do a different key. May all the living beings that there are, those that are stationary and those that move, the long, I'm not gonna get it, the medium and the short, all creatures that are weak or otherwise, all those invisible and visible, dwelling so near and those who dwell so far, all that are born and those which wait for birth. For always may they dwell in happiness. May all beings receive their proper food. May every being live a life secure. May every being dwell in happiness and finally attain enlightenment. Mm. I'll work on that. Um, Thank you, everyone. Take good care, and we'll see you soon.